Sex, gender, and sexuality. So, sexuality is the way a person expresses and experiences themselves as a sexual being. It can include sexual arousal, orientation, and different behaviors. In earlier periods of study of sexuality, there were Victorian beliefs that said that when a person masturbates, it can lead to blindness, impotence, acne, and insanity. There could also be nocturnal emissions that occur sexually, which were believed to be caused by brain damage and are believed to cause brain damage and then also death. As times went on, various people started to research sex, and Ellis said, let's correct some of these things, these myths that have exist. He devoted his life to developing some reliable and more scientific ways to view sexuality so that it didn't become something that was shameful, something that people felt negative about. The Kinsey reports occurred when about 8,000 surveys and interviews went out to ask people detailed questions about their sexual beliefs and practices. Masters and Johnson did a lot of research with sexuality through laboratory experimentation and observation with couples. And their research was the first to explore how the body physiologically responds to sex. When it comes to culture differences, many cultures view sexuality in different ways. In some cultures, such as the Polynesian culture, children are readily exposed to sex and they're taught about it, and they are free when it comes to sexual expression as adults. And some cultures near Australia, there's a permissive attitude towards childhood sexuality, and parents often soothe their infants through stroking of their genitals. Men can have many wives when they become adults, and sexuality is not considered a problem. In some Irish islands, sexual expression is strongly discouraged in childhood, and there's very little intercourse or development of sexual pleasure when it comes to adulthood in that culture. So you can see that depending on how sex is viewed as a child will impact the sexual expression as an adult. And we know that American culture can have a combination of those things. Sex is the state of being biologically male or female and engaging in sexual activities. Gender is a psychological and sociocultural trait that's often associated with a person's biological sex, such as masculinity or femininity. So gender and sex are not necessarily separate entities. They're actually interrelated throughout the lifespan. When it comes to chromosomes, males have an X and a Y chromosome, and females have two X chromosomes. And there are the other biological parts of the body that help make a female or male, genetically male or female. There are also some other secondary characteristics that develop as a result of being primarily biologically male or female. Gender identity is how a person defines themselves as either male or female. Gender expression has to do with expressing yourself in a masculine or feminine way. And a gender role is something that's based on societal expectations. What's viewed as being masculine or feminine, what a male or female shouldn't do. Then there are variations of biological sex. There's intersex, and then there's normal variations in gender, which involve gender identity and how a person sees themselves as being gender fluid, uncertain, agender. So if you look at this chart, which is in your textbook, you can see all of the different ways of describing sex and gender. And of course, this chart is something that's much more accepted now in today's society than it was, say, 20 years ago. When it comes to a person's gender role development, social learning theory tells us that people learn to behave a certain way according to gender based on rewards and punishment and based on observing and mimicking role models. So some gender types behavior would be boys playing with trucks and girls playing with dolls. Those things occur as a result of social learning theory. So it's strictly environmental. Cognitive developmental theory tells us that gender development is an active process. There's social learning, but there's building of gender schemas or building images. So then those things become gender typed behaviors. So if I think what it means to be a boy is to be masculine and drive a truck, then I might play with a truck. And if I think my schema is that a girl is somebody who's caring and nurturing, then I might play with a doll. But there are some potential problems with those gender roles. We have gender role stereotypes, which are thoughts, feelings, and actions that can be applied to all men and all women. It can cause them to limit themselves as far as career options go. That's why there's a big push now for girls to be more involved in STEM programs so that not all males are becoming engineers, because females can be engineers and pursue other careers just so much as men. We know that there's still a gender wage gap. For every dollar earned by a white male, women earn 85 cents. This was statistics from 2019. So why is that? If they're doing the same job, a woman should be making the same dollar the male is making. Androgyny has to do with a combination of both masculine and feminine traits. Gender can be developed based on nature, genetics, nurture, environment, and biopsychosocial factors. When a person is transgender, their gender identity doesn't match their biological sex. That is not to be confused with gender bending or cross-dressing, because people who cross-dress or gender bend may not be transgender. Their gender identity may not be different than their biological sex. When a person is considered heterosexual, they're attracted to people of another biological sex. When a person is considered lesbian or gay, they are attracted to people of the same biological sex. When a person is considered bisexual, they are attracted to people of both biological sexes. And when a person is considered a pansexual, they are attracted to members of all genders, as well as to those who do not feel they have a gender. Someone who is asexual does not experience erotic sexual attraction to others, but may experience emotional or romantic attraction. And there's, of course, various terminology, acronyms to explain those areas as well. Sexual prejudice is a negative attitude that's directed towards individuals based specifically on their sexual orientation. If you look at figure 10.9, it has to do with a continuum of sexual characteristics and behaviors based on that chart we saw earlier, based on gender identity, gender expression, and gender sexual orientation. When it comes to sexuality, it's not just about reproduction. It's about connection, intimacy, pleasure, and the release of sexual tension. It has to do with bonding and experiencing that sexual response cycle together. So here is an example of the male sexual response cycle. and the female sexual response cycle. And you can see how incredibly different they are and how much more complicated the woman's experience is. A paraphilic disorder is any type of fetish or exhibitionist disorder that can involve various causal explanations. So it could be biological factors, psychoanalytic theory has some ideas about what causes it, these unconscious motives, or it could be based on learning. One way to treat a paraphilic disorder, or something where somebody is doing something sexually that is considered abnormal, is through aversion therapy. So maybe that person has to have castration and to make that end. A sexual dysfunction has to do with having trouble with a sexual experience. For males, it could be erectile disorder or premature or early ejaculation, where they have difficulty getting an erection or maintaining without ejaculating early. And for females, it could be female orgasmic disorder, where they have difficulty obtaining an orgasm, or vaginismus, pain during sexual experiences. And then there are also some disorders both males and females can experience. Female sexual interest arousal disorder and male hyperactive sexual desire disorder, which is when they're disinterested in sex. And then, of course, you can have substance or medication-induced sexual dysfunction, where taking various medications can cause difficulties sexually. There can be biological factors that increase sexual dysfunction: cigarette smoking, diabetes, using drugs. There could also be psychological influences, negative thoughts, heightened emotional states, performance anxiety. It could also be some, cultural factors that could exist, and what from a cultural standpoint you think is okay. And then, of course, gender roles and double standards. Take a look at the picture. You can see a bedroom scene from a married couple in the 1950s and 60s to a bedroom scene. This is 1950s and 60s. They were sleeping in different beds. Like, you don't want there to be any thought of anything sexually going on, whereas today's images show them cuddling together, where you can imagine that they probably are enjoying themselves sexually. Sex therapy with Masters and Johnson involves interviews and examination, trying to determine the sexual response cycle. They focused on the relationship. They looked at biological and psychosocial factors that could exist to create these sexual issues or problems. They focused on the cognitive factors. So what was going on in a person's head that may lead to various sexual responses. And they included homework assignments, things that they asked the couples to go home and do so that they could look at those things in the future. Sexually transmitted infections, or STIs, were formerly called sexually transmitted diseases. Millions of new infections occur in North America each year. The majority of people who are infected with sexually transmitted infections are under the age of 35, and if left untreated, they can lead to infertility, ectopic pregnancy, cancer, or death. AIDS is the HIV is the virus that leads to the AIDS infection, and there's many medications to treat that disorder available today. Here are some of the male-female differences in susceptibility to an STI. If you'll notice at the bottom here, these are the most common sexually transmitted infections. And as you can see, for most, women are more likely to be infected by men, except for genital herpes. That is, men and women are infected at about the same rate. Many people who are infected with a sexually transmitted infection are asymptomatic. And that's how these diseases can easily, or these infections can easily spread. It's often impossible to tell whether a sexual partner does have an infection. So if a person is just regularly checked up, then they will know, and then they can prevent spreading it to other people. Sexual victimization is any sexual activity that includes lack of consent, coercion, exploitation, and assault. Examples of sexual victimization are child sexual abuse, sexual assault, and sexual harassment. Child sexual abuse is molestation and can involve pedophilia. It is very widely different. It can involve direct physical contact, and it may not involve direct physical contact. It can vary according to the number of factors and rates of disclosure. As rates of disclosure increase, there could be a time delay, can also decrease. What are some ways to prevent child sexual abuse? Education, knowing the risk and avoiding tricky people, reducing the risk, having an open door policy between a child and a parent, and child empowerment so that the child knows that it is okay to talk about what's happening to them and knows the difference between touching that is okay and inappropriate. Sexual assault and harassment. Sexual assault involves engaging in sexual acts, or what's considered raping somebody, someone not giving consent to a sexual activity. And sexual harassment can lead to assault, but it involves saying things to a person that makes them feel uncomfortable. So rape, by definition, rape is a legal definition that can vary from state to state. About 10% of rapes or sexual assaults are committed by strangers. More than 2 million of them occur in the United States each year, according to the CDC. But remember, not everybody reports their sexual assaults, so it could be a much higher number. The impact can be far-reaching, and recovery, can lead to PTSD. So it just depends on the person. So if we take a look at this chart, we can see that a sexual innuendo, something like winking, playful touching, and teasing, could be mutually consenting and safe. Sexual harassment could involve comments, pictures, touching, threats, blackmail, stalking, and bribery, which can be inappropriate, non-mutual, and can kind of lead to other things. So where things fall on this continuum all depends on the person's perception and how they view it. Sexual assault can range from a threat, physical force, mutilation, rape, and can involve murder as well. So how do we prevent sexual violence? Again, through education, knowing the risk factors and what is okay and what isn't okay, developing personal boundaries, knowing the difference between good and bad touches, and personal empowerment, feeling okay to stand up for your rights and being assertive and saying no if you're not interested in a sexual relationship. Risk. Here are some ways to reduce risk, and this is a lot of the ways that society uses: mass media campaigns, bystanders stepping up, instructing children that body secrets are not okay, increasing public awareness, etc. Here are some male and female differences in communication when it comes to sexual communication. Men tend to use speech to convey information and exert control, enhance their status, whereas women tend to use speech to achieve and share intimacy and closeness and maintain a relationship. So men are going to talk about themselves to boost themselves up, and women are going to talk about themselves to share important, close details about themselves. When it comes to conflict resolution, there are 4 different types of responses sexually. There's voice, talking things over to resolve a conflict. There's loyalty, remaining committed to the relationship even though there's a conflict. There's neglect, giving up on the relationship or withdrawing from it, which of course is going to lead to a breakup or divorce. And then there's exiting, the actual act of moving on and leaving the relationship. According to Godman, there are 4 styles of conflict that can be destructive, particularly in a marriage. These are known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, which is complaining about your partner; contempt, acting as if sickened or repulsed, like you're just kind of disgusted by that other person; defensiveness has to do with protecting yourself. So you become in defense mode and you're not considering the other person's point of view. And stonewalling, being emotionally withdrawn and just not participating, just cutting the person out. So what are some ways to involve conflict resolution to solve these conflicts? Acknowledge responsibility. If you do something wrong, you have to say it. Offer to repair the relationship. Repent. Express regret. Explain what went wrong. Request forgiveness. Research shows us that acknowledging responsibility and offering to repair are the 2 most important things you have to do. Unfortunately, many people who end up ending a relationship is because they refuse to acknowledge the responsibility and they don't want to take responsibility. When it comes to saying no, you have to be assertive, use strong verbal signals, be persistent, stick to your guns, and just say no. You don't have to give an explanation. Being assertive is one of the key ways to resort to not get involved with conflict with another person. And that is everything from sex, gender, and sexuality.